Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Deja View. I'm Reviews Editor Jake Leary, and I am here today with...
Hi, I'm Connor Duffy, and I'm the Assistant Multimedia Editor of The Ithacon.
I'm Celisa Calacal, I'm the Opinion Editor of The Ithacon.
And I'm Tyler, I'm the co-proofreader of The Ithacon.
Alrighty, and we are here today to talk about the Oscars, and I think to kick it off, we're going to start with something that was a big controversy around the office. We're going to talk about La La Land, so Tyler, if you want to just dive right in.
When I first saw La La Land, I really enjoyed it, because there's a lot of really awesome stuff that it does visually, but I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics at all, and the themes are all muddled and stuff, and it's a big problem that the two leads are white when talking about a music genre that's rooted in black culture.
And Celisa, I know you're very passionate about this issue. If you want to go a little bit more into that.
Yeah, I also agree. One of the main problems I have with it, even though I've seen it twice, it's still a problem I have, is how the main character who says that he wants to revive jazz in the movie is a white guy, and then the only black character that you do have, who is John Legend, he plays someone who is quote-unquote ruining jazz, and I think that's very offensive, considering that, like Tyler said, jazz is very much rooted in black history and black culture in America, and that's just one of the fundamental issues with the film. And the other sideline black characters are either dancers or they're musicians, and they don't have a voice at all. And I think that kind of silence is a form of erasure of what the true roots of jazz are.
Connor, what about you? What was your first thoughts?
Yeah, so I've only seen the movie once, but I've talked about it a lot with many different people on both sides of the discussion. And I think that overall it was a very smart movie. Culturally, obviously, it has its issues, as we've already started discussing, but visually it was very beautiful. Some strange choices, but overall I did really enjoy the film. I also would say, though, that it did not deserve the amount of recognition that it is getting. It's still a great film, though.
Did you see it before or after the hype train started rolling for it?
I saw it after the hype train, but I also saw it after the review was published in the Ithacon.
Okay. And Celisa, I want to jump back to you for a second. Mm-hmm. Outside of the obviously very problematic racial issues, did you see any redeeming qualities of the film? Was there anything in there that you could really sink into?
I really like the visual appeal of the film. Personally, I'm from Los Angeles, so getting to see this film shot in a place that I live was really great, and I think the visuals that they used were awesome, and I can see how that is really one of the driving forces of the film. I think Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling played their characters very well. I feel like their acting embodied the characters that they were given, even though I have issues with their singing because they're not great singers. But other than that, I think those are the two redeeming qualities. I still have fundamental problems with their love story itself outside of the racial aspect. I think it's problematic to kind of continue pushing the narrative that you can't have what you want. You can't have what you want.
You can't have love and success.
You can't have love and success at the same time.
Yeah.
Clearly these two characters didn't want to make sacrifices for the other. I think it's a problem that we still continue to push the narrative of the starving artist who has to give up love and affection to get what they want.
This is starving artist.
I think that also, though, so the ending of the film, obviously this is going to have spoilers, but the ending when they go through a montage of their lives and what could have been, and they realize all right, so hypothetically that all could have been, but is that necessarily realistic? And yes, you can have success and love, but they don't always work out in the way that you would necessarily think, and they look at that and see okay, this is what it could have been, but they also realize that's not what it was, and that's not necessarily what it would have been if they were still together. And so they decide that they're still, while unhappy in some ways, overall I feel like at the end of the film they're both happy. They both accomplished their dreams that were set forth in the beginning of the film. And I don't know, it was very smart at the end of the film.
I'll agree with that. I went on a crazy ride with La La Land where in the beginning I despised it as I was watching it, and I had this slow ramp up to, by the end I really enjoyed the movie, but after weeks and months started passing, it didn't stick with me like some of the other things that are on this list have, or some of the other things that aren't on this list have, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more later. But moving on from La La Land now to some of the other films, some of the other major films this year, particularly Manchester by the Sea and Moonlight, because those two seem to be vying with La La Land for the top spot, if you want to call it that. Have any of you guys seen either of them and have any like strong opinions on either one?
I saw Moonlight. I didn't see Manchester by the Sea, but going from what I saw from Moonlight, I thought that was a really amazing film. Not only was it well done, and it was also visually appealing like La La Land was, and of course the acting was really great, but it's not only a great film, it's also an important film in the way that it kind of subverts what we think about Black masculinity, and the way that it talks about gay Black men as well, and that whole topic. I think that's what makes it stand out from the rest, especially La La Land, because it's not only well done in the way that, you know, movies are made, but it conveys this message that I don't think we hear enough of. And I think that's what elevates it from being a great film to being an important film.
Do you think that's what the Oscars are here for? Do you think they're here to, you know, and I know that's a bigger debate than we'll ever have time to cover here, but...
I know, that's difficult because awards, one, are very arbitrary, so you don't really know what they're awarding, and the history of the Oscars is they don't really recognize Black talent as much as they should, which is where the Oscars So White hashtag comes up. So it'll be interesting to see who wins. I think if Moonlight wins, that'll be a big win for, you know, diversity and things like that, but also it's showing that like movies that portray messages like these that kind of are very different and out there and kind of destroy stereotypes are important and deserving of awards. But I don't know. We'll see if they're going to value what's important or if they're going to value what's good cinematically.
And I think that's like important to like obviously take films and like look at them in that like social and historic aspect and like understand, you know, what's the difference between like a great film and an important film. Because I agree that Moonlight had a very important message, but also like you look at Moonlight and it was technically also like a fantastic film. Like they did try out a lot of new and innovative cinematic techniques that I hadn't seen in other films beforehand. And then the lighting and the set design was also incredible. It was like a beautiful movie. The actors were fantastic. They really like were able to get into their roles and like create characters. If I had one issue with Moonlight though, this is also more of like a personal issue than issue with necessarily the film, but I felt like the ending kind of lagged off. The entire film was kind of building up this like narrative arc of like just following this one man through his life, and then I felt like it just ended. Like I didn't feel like there was a definitive point where I would have been like, all right, now I'm okay with this happening, or even like an open ending I would have been more okay with. It just didn't seem like a very strong ending to me.
I think Moonlight is, it was like the only one of the Best Picture nominees that kind of like transcended just being a movie and became like art, you know? And it felt so different, and I agree with Celisa that it's like a very important movie. And in the past, the Academy's recognized important films over films that might be technically better, like Spotlight won last year. And I can't for the life of me think of any particular scene from that movie, but I can remember stuff from like The Revenant and Fury Road. But it also, like, the system for their Best Picture rewards safe movies too. So I think Moonlight might have a smaller chance of winning against something like La La Land, where at least the Academy's love for it seems to be kind of unanimous.
Do you see any other safe movies on that list?
Nothing that would win. Because like maybe Hell or High Water, because it has so many nominations, and it's like some small movie that came out over the summer that nobody thought was going to get awards traction. But yeah, I really enjoyed Moonlight. My only problem with it is at the end, in the diner, there's only one person working in that diner that I saw, and that's just not a sustainable way to run a business.
Oh, okay. And nobody's seen Manchester?
Oh, I've seen Manchester.
Yeah.
Any strong feelings one way or the
It's
other?
not that interesting.
Yeah, it's rough.
I was gonna say, you talked about a safe film. I feel like out of all the films, Manchester by the Sea was probably the safest. While like the screenplay was like beautifully written and the characters were interesting and the actors were great. Ultimately, I felt like Manchester by the Sea didn't really take any risks. Like I didn't see anything necessarily innovative about the film.
Were any of you able to enjoy Manchester by the Sea? I know it's a hard thing to do.
I really loved all of Casey Affleck's awkward mannerisms. Like that part where he's sitting down with the mother and he has to make small talk, but instead he just sits there like, like that was hilarious. I love that. But the rest of it was just so depressing.
Yeah, that was an excruciating movie. It cost me a day just wandering around, not feeling great. I want to move into, I hate to call it the B tier, but I want to move into the next tier of Best Picture nominees. The ones that maybe aren't getting talked about as much, the ones that won't bring home the big awards. You mentioned Hell or High Water. I think of it very firmly in that category.
Yeah.
But some of the others in there too. You know, Hacksaw Ridge, I don't hear many people talk about,
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
and I think that's common. Arrival.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hidden Figures is in there too.
Yeah.
So, for me personally, out of all the films that I've watched, and I've watched the majority of the Best Picture nominations, Arrival is actually my favorite. I just thought like it was an incredible film. Like I love when I can watch a film and like have to figure out what's going on as I'm watching it, and like be able to piece things together in the plot. And I would like look back and like all of a sudden things start to make sense. And it was just very, very well put together and very well organized, and I just really appreciated that film.
I agree 100%. I think we're in the same boat on that, because I didn't expect what that movie was going to be when it hit me. And I think that stuck with me. On that list, that has stuck with me more than some of the others because it had that aha moment that I haven't seen in a long time or anything else.
I think that Arrival and Manchester too, I think is in the same boat where it's a one-watch movie. Because I've seen Arrival twice, and the second time it's like I already know what's going to happen, and there's not much else going on that's super interesting. Where I can watch something like Moonlight probably like 3 or 4 times and still get new stuff from it every time and still be entertained. But I don't think Arrival would be able to do that.
I've only seen Arrival once, and that's my fear going back again.
Yeah.
I almost don't want to watch it again.
Just give it a couple of years.
It held a very special place for me this year. What about you, Celisa?
I haven't seen any of the other ones.
Oh my
but
God.
I know, I'm sorry. Movies are expensive.
Yeah, I feel that.
But Hidden Figures is an interesting movie because I feel like this hasn't happened in a while where 2 films are nominated for Best Picture where they both kind of center either Black history or Black culture or Black characters. But I know Hidden Figures, you said it was written by a white director?
It was directed by a white guy.
A white
Yeah.
guy. So that makes it a little more interesting, and it's kind of, it's definitely also important because it portrays like a missing part of our American history that we don't talk about, which is these women of color and these Black women that helped put a man on the moon, like isn't talked about as much. But also I feel like the Academy really likes movies. The Academy really likes movies that center the stereotypical like Black historical struggle. Like we saw with 12 Years a Slave, that got a lot of nominations. Like it seems like the Academy really likes movies about like slavery or about struggle, and it's becoming this like very much like tried and stereotypical trope. So it's interesting to have both like Hidden Figures and Moonlight there, even though they are like very different. Like Moonlight isn't really embedded much in history as Hidden Figures is. It's more like a cultural comment. But Hidden Figures is very much rooted in history and is still important, but I just have issues with like continuing to look at these movies that like center struggle and oppression, but then ignore maybe other movies that are just as good, they're just not rooted in that kind of context.
So have we made any progress from, Oscars So White, or are we still in a similar place? We're just looking at it a little differently.
I think this year it's like a little bit of progress. I think we have more actors and actresses that are Black or that are like actors of color that are nominated for the big awards, like directing and screenplay, and then the actual acting categories. And that hasn't happened in a while. I know last year was really bad. It was really whitewashed. So it's a little better this year. But I think the fundamental problem isn't necessarily the Oscars, but the movie industry in general, and what movies, and kind of what we say makes a good movie. I think like a lot of times we fall into stereotypes, which is why we consistently get slave films, and we consistently get films about, struggle and stereotypes about Black people and other, like marginalized groups. And I think that we need to start stepping out of the box into what we think makes a good movie. And I think Moonlight is there. And I think there are other films out there that are just like Moonlight, that are just as important, that get pushed aside because it's not what we think a typical movie should be. So I think, and the issue too is like, not a lot of directors are directors of color, or they're not, from those other like marginalized identities too. Because if you have a movie about people of color and their experiences, but the director is white, you're not necessarily going to get that kind of connection where the director fundamentally understands the source material he's working with. So I think it's also important to have people behind the scenes, like scriptwriters and screenwriters and directors who are people of color, that can kind of make movies that don't fall into those stereotypes, and they kind of like transcend what we think a movie should be.
Moving into the end of our show, do you think there were any movies this year that weren't nominated that were able to capture that had that all-around perspective for you, and then for either Connor or Tyler, anything that wasn't nominated that you feel like is a bit of a cheat?
Jackie. I loved Jackie so much. And I think just like stylistically, it's one of the most interesting things that's come out this year, because nearly the entire film is just framed around Jackie Kennedy. And we're just watching her walk through her life in the days after her husband was assassinated. And the fact that she's the president's wife is kind of secondary to all the action that's taking place. It's more the fact that she's trying to preserve a legacy, and she's fighting against an administration of men to try and get her agenda done. And like just how it jumps through time and everything is really interesting. So I'm so pissed that it's just confined to the Best Actress and yeah, I think just Best Actress and soundtrack score races.
What about you, Connor?
Yeah, I'd say the other day actually I watched Nocturnal Animals, and that movie, that's a really screwed up movie. First of all, I was absolutely floored watching it, but also from a technical standpoint, again, like one of those movies that was just very visually beautiful. It was actually directed by Tom Ford, the fashion designer. So everything about the film is very aesthetically pleasing, but in a way that's almost unsettling because of the subject matter of the film. So I'd say I think that should have been nominated for more things, but I believe it only got one nomination, and it was for
Michael
support.
Shannon.
Yeah, was it Michael Shannon?
Yeah, Michael Shannon.
Okay.
Nocturnal Animals opens up with a rather large woman naked dancing with like pom-poms and like a bright and colorful hat. And that's like the first 4 minutes of it, like his opening credits over that. And it's supposed to be like an art exhibition thing. It explains itself. But there's like a couple of old people that walked into my theater like a minute late. And I was like, oh God, what did they walk into? I'm sure they just like turned around and walked right out.
Went right out. Yeah, those experiences are never fun. When you have the small children in the violent R-rated movie.
Yeah.
It's always awkward.
Yeah.
Somebody brought their 6-year-old to see Django Unchained.
Oh, good
She
idea.
was crying the whole
Parent of the
time.
year.
Why would you do that?
Oh. And Celisa, any standouts that
I don't know. I
didn't
mean,
make it?
Loving was nominated for, I think,
Ruth Negga got a nomination for that. I think that was it.
yeah, that was it. And I think maybe another small award.
Yeah.
But I feel like it should have gotten more, because that is also like a story that we don't hear of much, but that kind of like fundamentally changed also our history too, because that court case involved interracial marriage. So the case is Loving versus Virginia, and it pretty much, the result of it is like interracial marriages are now legal. Like I can marry like a white guy because I'm Asian. So that made that possible, and I feel like that's a story we don't hear that much. And I thought it was well done. I feel like it deserved a little more than it got. It didn't really get, I think, the recognition that it really deserved.
That one was interesting because like the thing is framed around their marriage instead of like the larger court case, which kind of like takes a backseat to just seeing the relationship unfold.
Yeah, I was deficient in my viewing duties this year, unfortunately. It's funny how taking a job as a review editor, you wind up seeing far fewer movies than you thought you would otherwise. But for 2016, I have two major standouts. The first being The Little Prince, which is the first thing I ever covered for the Ithacan.
Yeah.
Because that was such a heartwarming story, and it was beyond so many other animated films that I've seen, seeing things like Finding Dory last year that just didn't stick with me, and then seeing The Little Prince, which really did get into my head in a way I didn't expect. And then the second, on the polar opposite side of that, I want to tell you about a little movie called The Lobster. I don't know if anybody has seen The Lobster, but that is a ridiculous film full of ridiculous performances, and it's terrifying. It's the most unsettling thing I've ever seen. I can't put words to it, because to put any words to it would ruin just how unpleasant that movie is. And I believe Colin Farrell is nominated for Best Actor, and he won't win because it's not that kind of movie. But that was one of those things that will haunt my dreams for years to come, I think. And on that cheery note, we're going to end our show here. I'd like to thank Connor, I'd like to thank Celisa, I'd like to thank Tyler, all for being here today and sitting down and having this discussion about the Oscars with me. I really hope we can do more things like this in the future. Come back every week for more discussions of our reviews, our movies, our music, which I'm really trying to get somebody in here to talk to me about. Anything else we want to review, if you want to contact me, you can send an email to ithacanlifeandculture@gmail.com. And that's going to do it for this week. For Deja View, I'm Jake Leary. Thank you for watching.